How's things in Belfast? Bit mad?
Yeah, a bit mad.
Looks like there might be a new player in town.
Tensions are high. We're policing an area that could explode at any minute.
Coming here is an insult to this community.
Blue Lights. Watch now on BBC iPlayer.
Is that all right? Okay. She was my younger sister. Okay. We didn't share too many experiences together because of the age difference. But I remember we shared times, picnics on Western Beach on a Saturday or a Sunday, family picnics.
I look at the monitor there. Who's that old git with white hair? I still can't get used to it. I'm Nick Ross, a broadcaster, at least I was a broadcaster for 40 years. Don't do much of it now.
Jill was my cousin. She was,
I'm Hamish Campbell, and I was the Detective Chief Inspector in '99 and the Senior Investigating Officer for the murder of Jill Dando. We, the Metropolitan Police writ large, investigated that case so thoroughly, to the end of our ability, and examined so much to try to come to a conclusion. And we're now 20 years later. I think it is relevant in one way to hear a perspective from the police, and to give perhaps a view on it from a 20-year distance.
Good morning from Jill and me. You're watching the BBC's Breakfast News. More of that in a moment, but here's Jill with something else.
Struggling away, hello.
Jill started on BBC Breakfast Time, and then she was on the 6 o'clock news, and I think you get promoted within the news hierarchy.
Also in this morning's programme, more dockers are at work than on strike. The Queen, in her Christmas message, has said she will pray for peace around the world.
That's it. The next national news is, of course, the 9 o'clock news.
From the 6 o'clock team there, good evening.
Good evening.
We were a double act on the 6 o'clock news, I suppose. As far as the audience was concerned, Jill was a friend dropping in. More so than any other newscaster I think I've ever known.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. I've now got something in my eye. Hello, at the end of the last series of Holiday, I was in New Orleans.
She'd always thought how lovely it would be to be on the holiday programme, for instance.
Can I just check again? I just want to just check something.
And then when that came to fruition, Jill couldn't believe her luck that this thing that she dreamed of being on had been offered to her.
We would just watch it at home thinking, oh yeah, there's Jill on the telly. She was presenting, she'd done breakfast, she was on the holiday programme, which was huge at the time, Crime Watch, the same, a lot, millions of people were watching it. She had this interest in doing something in TV from a very early age, and achieved her ambition quite spectacularly.
Good evening and welcome as people all over the country are joining together once again to solve some of Britain's most difficult and serious crimes. It all depends on you. And together we've
Jill wore high heels on the programme, and when she wore high heels, she was taller than I was. Easy to upstage me. In the last shot of Crime Watch, we come together and say good night to the camera.
Don't have nightmares, do. Sleep well. Good night.
Good night.
And as she came in on that first programme, she quietly kicked her high heels off so that she wasn't taller than I was. She did that every single show.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
At the time, I was Director of News for the BBC, and I first saw Jill when she was presenting Spotlight. I'm sure it was Spotlight in the Southwest. We were immensely lucky because you had someone there who just had this really special connection with audiences. It was remarkable.
I'm sorry. Just like I was fiddling around with all my earpieces.
People saw the talent that she could bring and the natural character that she had. She never had any airs or graces.
So what have you been doing on board?
Eating.
In the last 2 years or so of her life, I would say that Jill went from being competent to being a star. She arose and looked amazing. She was, I would say, in command then. She was powerful.
Hollywood, Los Angeles, the greatest wannabe city in the world.
The level of her success surprised her, but she, I don't think, ever really gave herself credit for just how good she was.
There was a lot of razzmatazz, and there was a lot of celebrity events, prize givings. She was going to these amazing places, she was staying in amazing hotels, she had all these lovely outfits. But that doesn't mean to say she didn't forget. She still retained that girl next door persona, which was absolutely the person that she was, and she didn't change.
So until next week, goodbye.
On that day, I walked up my road, took my usual route, up Gowan Avenue. Whoever it was picked a very quiet time in order to be able to do what they did. Well, I crossed over the road. And then I saw Jill's car. I looked at her front door, and then I saw.
Thank you. Ambulance service, hello.
Hello, ambulance. I'm walking along Gowan Avenue. It looks like there's somebody collapsed. Confidentially, it looks like it's Jill Dando, and she's collapsed in her door. There's a lot of blood.
Can you just approach and check that the lady's breathing for me?
She doesn't look as if she's breathing. She's got blood coming from her nose. Her arms are blue.
I just need to find out if she's breathing. Is the lady's chest going up and down?
Oh my God, no, I don't think she's alive.
Right, okay.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Don't worry, I'm going to get some help there as fast as I can.
When I arrived, Miss Dando's body wasn't there. That had already been taken by the ambulance service. I still thought it was a stabbing, and it was quickly established. I understood it, whoever it was had been shot. We could see the nature of the contamination that was being conducted by the ambulance crew. But yeah, there was a limited forensic field there. The fact that it was Jill Dando created an immediate media interest and a lot of news. But obviously we had to wait for formal identification. And there was a police officer at the hospital, and then he confirmed to me that it was her.
Between 11:45 and 12 o'clock, the body of a woman was found outside number 29 Gowan Avenue. That woman has been taken to Charing Cross Hospital, and that woman has been declared dead shortly after 1 o'clock. That woman has been identified as Jill Dando, the television presenter.
Jill was 37, yeah. No, she was 37. Jill was 37. 37. Peter, I'm telling you, she was 37.
All right.
I told her she was 37. She was exactly 2 years younger than me. She was 37.
What should I say?
I'm telling you, she was definitely 37. Definitely. Here we go.
Within the past few minutes, police have confirmed that the BBC television presenter Jill Dando has been stabbed to death outside her West London home. She died in the ambulance on her way to hospital. There are no more details at the moment. The next scheduled bulletin is at 2:40.
It mattered so much to us to deliver the news accurately about one of our own. It was so dreadful and is so dreadful to have a personal friend murdered on her doorstep. It just makes my blood run cold even now. It's just awful.
Jill Dando arrived here by ambulance at 12:30 p.m. Despite all efforts by ambulance paramedics and hospital medical staff, she was certified dead at 1:03 p.m.
Her injuries were so bad that police were unable to tell immediately if she'd been shot or stabbed.
My two sisters came and knocked on the door, and they said, there's been a terrible accident, and Jill's been stabbed, which is what the news was saying at that time. Then I think I said, is it serious? Where is she? How serious is it? And that's when they said she's dead. So obviously that was,
not only the immediate family, but a lot of other people in Weston and the Western area who are going to be deeply, deeply saddened by what's happened today. As far as my dad's concerned, I mean, she was a devoted daughter and, for me, a sort of loving sister.
That shock, the shocking news. I mean, when it's a close relative like that and you're told that that person has died in those sort of circumstances, and then suddenly they're no longer there, you had to front up and pay tribute to Jill, which is the least she deserved in that moment.
I can't believe we're talking in the past tense about her. She was somebody who had such joie de vivre, such, passion about life. She was everything one could want in a colleague and a friend.
I got a call from a friend of mine, newspaper editor, who said he was sitting down. Told me the news.
And that's the main news tonight, the brutal killing that today stunned everyone here at the BBC Television Centre. A senseless murder that leaves this newsroom in which she worked a darker place and makes a lot poorer the medium which she graced. Good night.
Good afternoon. Officers leading the hunt say 5 people saw a well-dressed man near Jill Dando's flat about the time of her murder.
She was shot with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol which can't be legally held.
The tributes here on the flowers echo the overriding reaction of shock that has met the news of Jill Dando's death.
Thousands of people have been sending messages of sympathy to the BBC. Many are from people who never met Jill Dando.
The nation took an interest in a murder investigation in a way that you see in other cases, but this somehow felt quite personal, I think, for many people in society. It is continually on the national radio. It is continually on London radio. It is now recaps of Jill speaking back to you through the TV screen, even though she has passed.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Wave after wave of information and outcry and empathy. Things like a 7/7, a 9/11, they're a different scale. This was a single fatality. This was one murder. But it was the victim, it was the circumstance that made it one of the biggest cases, if not the biggest case of its time.
She had done a huge amount, personally, in the fight against crime by her role, not least in Crime Watch UK, and therefore this makes her death all the more poignant.
It was mentioned in Parliament by Jack Straw. Tony Blair came forward to talk about it because this is such an extremely rare event. Everybody in the newsroom was saying, why? How could this possibly have happened to Jill?
The police admit it looks like a professional job.
The circumstances make it look like it's a professional hit, but we just cannot exclude somebody who has a revenge or a grudge or has been stalking. Any number of possibilities are open as to why Jill Dando was murdered yesterday.
Police say it could have been a stalker or a professional hitman, but every possible motive is being looked at.
These are the decision logs that I wrote in the inquiry. Much of these logs have not been seen by anybody. They've been seen by the police, they've been seen by the courts and the defence, but they remain invisible. I look back, there was a lot of pressure there, and that, even in those early hours and days, and there was a lot of people calling me directly, and the media, and through the press office, and through senior command, giving ideas and suggestions as to who killed Jill Dando. Here we have no clear motive at all as to why kill Jill Dando. What has been achieved by killing her? Revenge, revenge for what? Money, sex, jealousy, ex-boyfriends, business, television, secrets about to be revealed, criminals, her crime watch work? Was there more than one person which we didn't know about?
Either Jill Dando was murdered by a single person as an individual operating on their own, or she was killed by an organised gang.
What motivates a killer to kill in broad daylight? This isn't in the middle of the night. This isn't some dark alleyway. This was one of the highest risk murders that you could probably do. Is that a trained killer, or is it an absolutely chaotic killer driven by the emotion of the moment? All of those facets have to be worked through.
Do you ever get worried about some of the things you see on Crime Watch?
Oh, yes, you do, because you hear of such terrible people in this world doing terrible things, and that's what worries me, is the mentality of some people that can actually do those awful things. So, yes, I do.
Did you, the pair of you, feel that you might get into trouble as a result of doing this? After all, you were attempting to nail fairly villainous individuals.
I don't believe there is any connection, a Crime Watch connection with her killing. Right from the beginning, there was this assumption this was something to do with Crime Watch. To go for somebody who's just the messenger, well, why? Because it's a crime program, sure, but I mean, why not because of the holiday program she was doing? Why not because of any other program? Why not just because she was famous?
How would it be served by somebody on Crime Watch, some villain or criminal, going, I know what, I'm so upset with this, I'm going to kill Jill Dando? Well, it's making no sense at all. Even if it's a contract, there should be a fairly identifiable reason for someone to arrange and pay someone else to kill another. But nevertheless, we examined all the cases that Jill was involved in, which cases she broadcast, and, you know, with the police officers, well, there was just simply no evidence for it.
And then the rumours started circulating that maybe she had been not just killed, not just murdered, but actually assassinated.
Police confirm a death threat against the head of BBC News is being investigated by detectives leading the hunt for Jill Dando's killer.
Tony Hall was one of the first to express his shock at the murder of Jill Dando on Monday.
Well, we're all absolutely devastated by...
We had 3 calls, as I recall, to the BBC switchboards in London and Belfast. I listened to the voice of one of them, which said, basically, I was next. I mean, they were threatening me. I have no idea what that amounted to. Was it a real threat? Was it not a threat? You know, there are often copycat things that happen after these sort of events, and the police took it seriously, but I don't know.
Speculation remains high she was the target of a Serbian professional killer responding to the NATO bombing of their television station in Belgrade.
By the time it was light, the full extent of the destruction was clear. Videotape fluttered from the trees nearby.
My mother did tell me the Serbs had said when we bombed their broadcasting station that we'd killed the Jill Dando of Serbia. The fact that it might have been a tit-for-tat reprisal, then I can understand that that might have been the case, particularly since the way Jill was killed made me think it represented something bigger than the actual act. It doesn't mean to say that that was what happened, but I can see that that was what happened.
Out of all the logbooks, this is the decisions which relate to sensitive issues.
I'm way down the line, making inquiries with the security services and the intelligence branches, and to see whether they had any information or intelligence in respect of, is it really likely that somebody from Serbia travelled all the way to England to kill Miss Dando? Very unlikely, really. Is it likely then that someone in Serbia or wherever contacted someone here to tell her that she must be killed? If there was some information, I'm sure we would have been told. Well, I know we would have been told, but there wasn't any.
The Serbian link was pretty quick to be able to close that down through international intelligence opportunities, but it was one that was, I think, foisted on the investigation team and was held to be true, and some people will still aver today that it's, that was the case, but no evidence was found.
I can think of many cases where a darker conspiracy is offered up and suggested, which turns out actually to be, unfortunately, somewhat more mundane and boring. I always to say, what do you actually know? What do you really know? And that was the key here. What was the actual evidence? And that, as I say, is back to the crime scene. This is the casing which was found at the crime scene. One of the features of this casing were these little indentations. There were 6 of them going round the circumference. So there was something odd about it. Someone had obviously done it by hand. It was one of the features which didn't reveal professionalism.
The brass cartridge case has a series of tiny indentations around the top edge. This picture, shot by the forensic team, shows those dents in a straight line, an indication that the bullet may have been tampered with or explosive powder removed to deaden the sound of the shot.
If this is a professional, organised shooting, this individual or gang only had 1 bullet to fire, and the 1 bullet they managed to fire had to be put together. What was that about in terms of firing in a professional capacity, firing and then leaving the signature bullet behind? That was itself an odd feature as well.
Police know the weapon used in the murder was a semi-automatic handgun, similar to this one. But detectives are still reluctant to place too much emphasis on theories that a contract killer carried out the attack.
There was a view that the person responsible was likely more to be a sort of individual act rather than an organised criminal network, planned hit. That wasn't the thinking. The post-mortem report, the nature of the injury to her head, the markings there indicated that a silencer couldn't have been on the gun.
They always say that most people who are killed by someone they know. When this situation happens, you think about every possibility and everybody becomes a suspect. You question everything and you question everybody's motives and you think about every single person in turn and think, could they have been the one that did it?
So this is all Jill's special memories. It's a record of her career. This was put together by a friend of hers. So you can see that the cuttings are cuttings that have been made by someone else, and then this was given to Jill. And that's just typical of the sort of thing that Jill would get. I can't bear to get rid of it because everything in here was so important to her. But also, I think it's her legacy, and I think for my daughter's sake, I want us to have this. And we don't know what we'll do with it, but someday we might. And in my old age, which I thought I'd spend with Jill, it would be nice to go through the stuff. Sorry.
She always seemed sensible. She was always nicely dressed, always interested in everybody else, always very kind to people. And you never saw a horrible side to her at all. And she wasn't too good to be true. This is really who Jill was. She didn't have any enemies. It's so ridiculous. Why would they target Jill? What possible reason could anybody have for doing that? Except, of course, the fact that she was in the public eye.
The public do love you because some people in your position could suffer from being overexposed, and it's not a problem with you. We could take even more of you.
Well, I don't know about that. No, there is a danger. There is a danger. I mean, yeah, there's Crime Watch, the holiday programme, and the 6 o'clock news. And I realised when I took on Crime Watch as the extra job, I thought, well, people are going to get tired. Maybe they are, but I enjoy it. And I think there's enough diversity in the programmes for people not to think, oh gosh, you know, it's her again. It's sort of, I'm a bit of a chameleon. Maybe I can sort of adapt to the various roles, hopefully. But I love it. Love it.
Did she talk to you about her previous stalkers?
Not that I can remember in particular detail, but I do know every now and again there were people who she found... she wanted to be nice to everybody, and sometimes she found it difficult to be nice to everybody when they were making her life difficult. I can't think of any particular examples, but I know that they were there.
Jill Dando had two lives. She had her public life and she had her private life. It's entirely possible that her public life was the stimulus for someone killing her.
The theory that it was a singular individual working on their own did include the type of person who may be stalking Dando or obsessed with her or following her or besetting her. We didn't know. But the literally thousands of letters that she received, and within that there were some, well, there's no other word for it, some odd letters that she did receive, and there was one individual who was clearly obsessed with her and stalking her.
The police have also approached the National Crime Faculty at Bramshill in Hampshire for assistance. There they can get access to expert psychological advice, which will allow them to develop a profile of the killer.
The psychologist's report help with the type of background he would likely have, or experience he may have, or convictions he may or may not have.
What do you mean by a loner? We all know people who are, not very gregarious. Do you mean, as that witness said, a bit of a funny one?
Yes, there is something odd about him, but he might be alone but isolated, either emotionally isolated, not married, having difficulty with previous relationships with girlfriends. There will be an obviousness about this separate away from society and groups of people.
And when you say obsessional about Jill, I mean, millions of people are fans of Jill, but you mean something very, very particular.
Yes, we're not talking about respect. Gowan Avenue is a typical residential street in West London. It's tightly packed with terrace houses, cars parked either side of the road. On the morning of the shooting, there must have been nearly 80 people passing through Gowan Avenue. But at the actual time of the shooting, there was none. There was the next-door neighbour here who saw a man leaving from the direction of 29 Gowan Avenue.
I heard the scream.
You heard it?
I did hear a scream.
Did you hear a man's voice or anything like that?
No man's voice at all.
And did you hear a shot, or did you...
There was no shots.
You saw this man yourself?
I have a particular vision of the guy. Yes, I did see him.
What exactly was he doing? How close were you? What did he do?
He walked very calmly away from the scene, and when I actually saw him, I thought nothing of it. I thought, in fact, it could have been a friend of Jill's when I heard the screaming. That's why I particularly at that moment didn't do anything that now I wish I could have done.
He didn't hear a gunshot, and he didn't react to the scream. But the scream or the cry was indicative of something to us, that Jill Dando had clearly in those last moments recognised danger, seen danger, and was reacting to it. Otherwise, why scream? As far as one can be certain of anything, the man walking away at a relatively fast pace was the person who had killed Jill Dando.
This is BBC One. A Happy New Year.
There's growing concern the inquiry is beginning to falter, and with no immediate prospect of an arrest, detectives are increasingly under pressure to come up with a result.
Sometimes I felt we were a day away from solving it, and other times I thought, no, we're a long way away. Other senior officers, they were asking, what are the likelihoods of this case being resolved?
How much had been pumped into the inquiry by that point?
Well, it's a considerable sum of money, really.
We have something like 700 sort of witness statements that have been made, and something like 7,000 sort of faxes and telephone calls that have been received. Information that all has to be gone through very carefully.
We had over 2,000 people named as potential suspects or responsible. Some actions to trace and eliminate one person might take a day. One action might take 2 weeks. But there's thousands of them. That's the issue of managing stranger homicides. You're looking at it and thinking, how do you know which one is right then?
A year after Jill Dando was gunned down on her doorstep, no one has been charged with her murder. The police are suggesting more strongly than ever that it was a stalker who shot her.
I remember writing in one of my decision logs that maybe the answer lies in the single loner individual. How is it we've spent all this time, all this media attention, all this information, and we haven't heard a single thing, really, as to who it is? And that this absence of anything good is because of that's who it might be. I return to the loner, the infatuated, the psychopath, the disturbed, or the obsessed. They're all equally capable of planning good luck and the ability to hurt and harm. My own notes show that this is the most likely explanation. The witnesses of the 26th of April and the earlier days show a man loitering in the street. Can it really be possible that this is 10 or 15 different men, or one man seen through different eyewitnesses and lenses, thus explaining the various discrepancies that we have? Not only have we not seen one piece of evidence or information to show Dando was the subject of a contract killing, the location of her death points away from contract. I remember we discussed this. Her attendance at Gowan Avenue is sporadic. It's not the location anyone would choose because there is simply no guarantee or knowledge that she would ever appear there. And it was shortly after that, by coincidence, part of the inquiries, that the man Bulsara stroke Gad stroke George came into the inquiry.
Unbeknown to the police, the person that they came to believe was the prime suspect, Barry George, had been sitting in their inquiry all along, lying in this massive information that had flooded into the inquiry in the early days. They had these actions that had been generated that they'd never acted on. One of them was to trace, interview and eliminate somebody called Barry Bulsara, I think was the first name that came into the inquiry, whose name had been given to them by this little organisation to support people with disabilities. It was called HAFAD. Not that far from where Jill Dando lived. He left HAFAD and went to try and get a lift, a free lift from a taxi, and he'd been at this taxi company.
The taxi company ran completely independently. So we had this guy, again agitated, hanging around soon after the murder and trying to get out of the area, but he didn't have any money. The following day, they rang again and said the same person had come back and tried to plant false alibis.
There was a weakness in the system that they were using now, which has been resolved, that it wasn't an effective method of cross-referencing information. But even that, because they didn't have, there wasn't a single name. It wasn't, you know, Barry George, Barry George, Barry George. It was Balsara, this strange man living in the road. There was different names coming in. I think the police recognised at the time it was a failure, that the significance of them should have become apparent to them sooner. I think you have to see it in the context of, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages coming in.
The delay was unavoidable in comparison with the scale of the work that was required.
I've re-examined in detail all we know of this subject. Some of it has come too slowly to my attention and represents and answers many of the questions and problems with this investigation. It's therefore essential that he is either eliminated or implicated as quickly as possible. We are 1 year behind him.
I think as soon as they interviewed him, then I think he began to loom larger in their considerations. He'd been to jail for attempted rape. He had been convicted of posing as a police officer. He tried to join the police and he'd been rejected, and he cut up the rejection letter and tried to create a kind of warrant card out of it. That doesn't make him a killer, but it's certainly quite odd.
So we had his background. He lived locally. He was, you know, what I would call within the scene almost. And so there were a number of markers which came up to say, let's just pursue this. And that's how I then authorised the search warrant. From the search of George's house, more information came to light and material which caused us to be, me certainly, extremely concerned about who it was who'd come into our inquiry. One of the key things that was found was many rolls of film, undeveloped, old-fashioned camera film, which we actually obviously got developed, all hundreds of photographs of women. Certainly one, maybe two, were in Gowan Avenue. George had notes there of car numbers of people in the street, local streets near where he lived, the names and addresses, or certainly the addresses and little maps of other women in the local area. So those were some of the features, in addition to a collection of old cuttings on Jill Dando. He had the Ariel magazine, which was a BBC News magazine. There was an old holster for a weapon in his house, a number of business cards for firearms dealers. In amongst the undeveloped footage film was a photograph of him, clearly taken by somebody else, holding a semi-automatic starting gun. The type of weapon which the forensic scientists a year earlier had indicated would be one of the weapons which could have discharged that bullet. The search didn't reveal a direct link to the killing of Dando, because there was nothing to link. But what the search revealed was some circumstantial connections to the crime scene. One of the witnesses, a number of them, talked about a man with a three-quarter length coat or a dark coat, and another witness had seen it, and then here was a dark three-quarter length coat. And so at that time it was photographed, and then it was going to be examined for any subsequent forensic trace. When that was subsequently examined, after it had been photographed, There was a single particle of gunshot residue in the inside jacket pocket of the coat. Gunshot residue which actually had and contained the same elements of lead, barium and antimony as the gunshot residue which was both on the cartridge case and in the head hair of the wound for Jill Dando. There's no doubt in my investigative mind, its discovery and reporting added to the situation and the position. I mean, it could have been a firearms particle of a different constituent, because the firearm residue is of different types 1 to 5 really. So it was a type 2 constituent match of the chemical elements. Well, he could just as easily have said, well, actually it's type 1 or type 4. That would have been a floundering point as well. But out of all the 5 types, it was this one. So it is one piece. But nevertheless, I'm not going to hide behind the point. I thought it had some relevance to the case.
Police hunting Jill Dando's killer have arrested a man on suspicion of murder.
1 year after the shooting, detectives say it's a highly significant development.
Well, the police told us this morning that somebody had been arrested on suspicion of Jill's murder. And while we were very interested in that development, like everybody else, we just have to wait and see what progress is now forthcoming.
Yeah, my dad and I thought, well, it might have been a breakthrough. There was evidence, they had evidence, but that it wasn't the end of the story.
Well, we know he can be held for 24 hours. After that time, there has to be an extension of a further 12 hours.
The decision made to arrest George was mine, with other senior officers directly involved in that decision-making.
The suspect was brought to the central London police station where he was questioned about the murder of the TV presenter.
Did you kill Jill Dando, Mr. George?
No, sir.
What's your interest in Jill Dando?
I have an interest in Jill Dando, sir.
Funny that when Mr. George was seen and he made his statement, he was very clear where he was and what he had done. When he was arrested, he then changed the account of where he was and moved his timing and what he did quite differently.
Did you ever buy a G145 8mm blank firing government automatic?
No, sir.
Have you ever possessed one of those?
No, sir.
Have you ever handled one of those?
No, sir.
Have you ever fired one of those?
No, sir.
Barry George said he never had firearms, owned firearms, used firearms, or discharged firearms. So we were then left with this single piece of invisible gunshot residue in his pocket.
In my experience, the Crown Prosecution Service doesn't rush to charge unless it feels it has a sufficiency of evidence. And in my personal experience of Hamish, he is a man who will go out of his way to disprove as much as prove because of the gathering of evidence. No preconceived ideas.
The discovery of the particle and its establishment as the same type of gunshot residue as what was on the casing and her hair was just one tiny element in the connecting of all these other factors. It sat there just as that. Did it contribute towards a decision to charge or decide to charge? Yes, it will have done, but it wasn't the only factor.
Good evening. A man has been charged with the murder of the BBC television presenter Jill Dando.
This evening, the detective leading the inquiry left Hammersmith Police Station after charging Barry Bulsara with murder under his original name, Barry Michael George.
I must admit I wasn't convinced that he was the person who had done it. It just didn't seem completely feasible to me. I think it all seems a little bit contrived and convenient.
There was very much a feeling among some, sections of the media that Barry George had been kind of picked on, alighted upon as, you know, the local weirdo, if you like, who the police could drape the case around.
Well, there's always been the view in the media and elsewhere that the police chose Barry George somehow as a scapegoat and, for want of a better word, a patsy for the investigation team because we couldn't solve it. And that is somewhat insulting and is completely untrue and wrong. None of the things had emerged. He would never have been charged at all.
It was at 1 minute to 11 o'clock that the Senior Treasury Counsel, Orlando Pownall for the Crown, began to outline the prosecution case.
The trial lasted for something like 52 days of legal argument and evidence.
That there are compelling categories of circumstantial and forensic and scientific evidence which, when taken together, prove that the defendant was the man in Gowan Avenue who was responsible for killing Jill Dando.
For him to have done it, all the stars would have had to be aligned. People didn't notice that he was walking around with a gun. He would have had to be there at the right time. How did he know how to do it? There were all these questions where you thought that someone like Barry George wouldn't have been capable of doing it.
The evidence has been heard. Now it is being weighed. In the Old Bailey's No. 1 court, counsel for the prosecution and the defence are presenting their final arguments on the guilt or innocence of Barry Michael George.
The jury, I think, after being out for something approaching 5 days, one could see on their faces when they came back into court, there must have been a very difficult decision. Some of them were crying, there was a lot of distress, there was a huge amount of tension in the courtroom. So no one really could predict which way the verdict might go.
The day that he was found guilty, I was in my office and I just sobbed. And I can't tell you why I sobbed. It wasn't relief. It wasn't celebration. I have absolutely no idea what it was, but I think it was just the fact that it marked a point in time and it was maybe even relief from everything that we'd gone through over the previous couple of years.
I was surprised when Barry George was convicted. My personal view was that there was evidence on which one could see a conviction, but for me, if I'd been on that jury, I didn't think that the evidence was sufficient to justify a conviction. The thing that really sealed his fate in the end was a single particle of firearms residue.
When they found a particle, I was always very skeptical of that. As soon as you enter some scientific evidence which could raise any doubts at all, then there is always the prospect that it crashes and burns.
Barry George was driven back to prison. His appeal failed, his conviction upheld.
They have taken evidence and they've used it, and there is no evidence to convict Barry. This is just appalling.
If people were to read the information and understand the full facts, I think, like the jury, they would equally be assured that Barry George murdered Miss Dando.
I'm Angela Shaw. I am a forensic scientist. My area of expertise is in gunshot residue, and I've been an expert in that field for 19 years. The Criminal Case Review Commission will review any cases where a legal party puts forward any grounds that they think could mean that the conviction was unsafe. So it was mid-2006. The Criminal Case Review Commission basically felt that there had been a change in policy by the Forensic Science Service, which I was involved in writing, that would change the significance of the weight that was placed on a single particle. We ultimately felt that it wasn't a change, but they felt that that had been a significant change. And the Barry George case was a minor influence in writing that document, mainly because there was a disproportionate amount of attention the media placed on the finding of a single particle. In the case of the particle found in the pocket of Barry George, we would now categorise that as a type 2 gunshot residue particle. Similar particles were found on spent casing, found on the doorstep, and also on Jill Dando's hair. What you could say was that they were indistinguishable from each other, and therefore the spent casing could have been a source of the particle in Barry George's coat pocket. But there was a key question that hadn't been asked at the trial. That was, what was the significance of a single particle in a coat pocket a year after a shooting? If you're travelling around on the London Underground or on a bus, obviously there's a lot of hobby shooters. You have armed police officers who will travel around using public transport. It is rare, but we do estimate that you might pick up a particle. 1 in 100 people might pick up a particle unknowingly, which is why we don't put any evidential weight on a single particle. A single particle a year later in a coat pocket could not link Barry George to the shooting.
My view was, well, okay, there are numerous ways a single particle or any number of particles could have got into his pocket, and they're all but one of them must be legitimate and, you know, fair. Inadvertent contamination, he's been to somewhere or bumped into somebody who has gunshot residue, and so they're all perfectly possible. One other option, of course, was a more draconian one or dramatic one, was that in fact he got it from firing a gun, but you can't say that. It has no value on its own. It doesn't say that he was or he wasn't the person involved in the shooting, so it's going to have to be disallowed. It doesn't prove involvement in the shooting.
Barry George is cleared of the murder of Tito. He's a free man tonight after 8 years. His sister says the family's finally found justice. They've finally got justice. Yes, that's fine. Barry George is a free man tonight, cleared of the murder of the TV presenter Jill Dando.
We've been fighting for many years. Now we need time to get back together as a family. We also hope that the police will now look again into the murder of Jill Dando. Thank you.
Throughout this trial, his defence had maintained that this is a man with serious psychological problems and a very low intellect. That made him incapable of carrying out this crime.
Now, Scotland Yard say they stand by their methods.
The first thing I want to say is that we're disappointed at today's verdict, but we're especially disappointed for Jill's family and friends. However, we accept and respect the decision of the court this afternoon.
You know, you move on, but you don't forget. It was hard work. It was a commitment and energy and drive by everybody to try to find a real resolution to the case.
But you didn't for this one. In the end.
We, as an investigation team, brought someone before the courts, and that is what we had to do. So we made the investigation, came to a conclusion, and submit the evidence. You know, the outcome is entirely out of our hands. You're either guilty or you're not guilty. It's not really determining whatever you mean by innocence. So those are decisions made by the court, and that's what we have to live with.
When Barry George was finally acquitted, on the evidence the jury heard, I think he was rightly acquitted. I'd have acquitted him.
Without that single piece of, that particle of firearms residue, one can see what a dent that made to the evidence against him, because that was really the only thing that connected him to the actual event.
Whether one does or doesn't believe Barry George did it, Barry George is an innocent man in the eyes of the law, and that is the end of the discussion.
Do you ever think that it'll get solved?
Do I think somebody will come back to court? Probably not. No.
Do you think that someone new might come to court?
No. No.
I would like to see somebody charged and convicted, but I would just like to know why someone would want to kill her. I would like somebody, the person who did it, to be able to tell me, or to be able to tell a jury or a judge why it happened, and that would be fine. That would put my mind at rest, and that would be the closure for me.
Do you think that you ever will?
I remain hopeful that will happen. We're 20 years on now, so it's the odds are against it, but I live in hope.
We, in the general sense, have been left unfulfilled by what could have been her ongoing potential. And I think that she was on a journey and she was only halfway up that mountain.
What is raw when it happens is less raw, much less raw, 20 years on. But I'm really proud that we have the Jill Dando Institute in Jill's name, from undergraduates through to masters and PhD students, doctorates. We've got people who are looking at forensics, and particularly in flaws of forensics, how they can mislead us. And we're trying to support police in bringing much, much more preventative effort to crime. She'd be proud of it, immensely proud of it, I'm sure. And that stands as a lasting legacy to her.
The moment that changed all of our lives was that moment when that happened and Jill was killed. You would like to hold somebody accountable, but it won't change things. Whoever did that is still around, and I'm not convinced that you can hide something like that forever. But we'll see.